Hey everyone, welcome back to How to Test This, the podcast designed to help software testers understand risk and adopt new testing solutions with ease and confidence. Your host is Mahamadou, a quality assurance consultant with over 10 years of experience across multiple industries. In each episode, he'll talk to different experts and learn from them about how they test.
Today, I'm excited to welcome John Robinson. Thank you, John, for joining.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Okay, just to give you a brief overview about yourself, John owns a consulting company that specializes on supporting QA and DevOps clients with their market strategies, in addition to acting as an industry analyst in the QA testing DevOps space. Also, with nearly 20 years of experience, John is a thought leader in the QA space. He worked for multiple companies such as Proval, Testigma, Home Advisors, Limited Brands, and Victoria's Secret. Multiple industry as well, from startup to Fortune 100. And he also had multiple roles as a QA director, automation architect, or even chief storyteller. John is also part of the Salesforce ecosystems. His expertise led him to become head of Salesforce as well. John is a community engager, an active member, or a mentor in groups such as Salesforce Testers, QA Automation, Career Group. Now, let's share the agenda for today's episode. First, we start with John Robinson's background. Then we'll define what is Agentic QA. Next, we go over some QA responsibilities and why they are at risk. After that, we'll share how testers can evolve over the next few years. And finally, we'll share some steps to get started on learning resources. So without further ado, let's get started. John, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for people who don't know you, can you tell about what led you to enter the QA world in the first place?
Oh man, my journey to QA was in a lot of ways an accident, and it's actually something that because of that has fascinated me how people get there to begin with. But I had been doing IT, sysadmin, help desk type of roles for almost 11 years. And when you add that to my 20 years, yeah, I've been in the industry a long time. But I had been doing it for a long time, and I just got burned out doing the IT side of things. It was very reactive. People were always upset. Wasn't a lot I could do to really help people. And I finally just said, this is just not fun anymore. So I went and pushed a broom on a construction project out in California for like 3 months, and just tried to figure out what I wanted to do next. I had no idea. And came back after the summer, and a guy in our church was working at a consulting company that did, they were primarily an Oracle shop, but they had kind of a secondary business, which was testing and specifically performance testing. And they were trying to expand that side of their business. And they're like, yeah, hey, I don't know if you know much about testing, but we're doing this thing. We're trying to hire a bunch of people. We have a lot of projects, and your background seems like it'd be a good fit. That was almost 20 years ago now, June of 2006. And I was like, I don't know anything about it. I'll give it a shot. I'll interview. And went in, ultimately got the job. Ended up seeing my interview results after the fact. I was not a good interview. I knew nothing about what I was talking about. It just happened to be something that really fit the way my brain worked. So started off in 2006 doing performance testing. And, within 3 years was a QA manager and kind of operated at a leadership level from that point on.
Yeah, I kind of relate. Getting into QA is always a funny story. But
it's fascinating to me. Like this is, I've written a lot of stuff over the past few weeks and years, and One of the questions that has always stuck out to me and fascinated me is how people end up in QA. Because out of all of the disciplines that are out there, it's the only one that doesn't have an education or career track for it, right? You have to come from somewhere else to land in QA. And it's always fascinated me.
Yeah, exactly. But I saw your career path, and how did you evolve from being a QA practitioner to becoming a leader helping QA and DevOps companies succeed?
Um, it's kind of so I was on the individual contributor side, from '06 to 2017. And in 2017, I made my first go at, I had just gotten tired of working for other people. The corporate grind was just really wearing me down. I really enjoyed the QA space, but it was really hard to feel like I was making an impact or a difference on the whole. And most of what I was running into was less practitioner type of challenges and more leadership and strategy type of challenges. And so I started a consulting company in 2017 to, the first iteration was the QA consultancy. And it was really to go in and help companies figure out how to do their QA testing better, right? And did that for almost 2 full years. One of the things I learned along the way was I ended up not working with the QA teams as much as part of that conversation. I ended up working with business or product or development teams, project teams to help them work better with their QA teams and departments. And so because of that, that kind of got me into more of the true consulting advisory type of role. And then was really enjoying that. I had a project with Nissan, was enjoying the things I was doing, and kind of got headhunted to jump to the other side of the fence, on the product side, which was at Probar. The idea was originally that I was going to head up a consulting beachhead for this product that was based overseas to try and land and get into different companies here in the States. That grew well beyond that scope pretty quickly. Which I actually think you talked to one of the guys that I hired as part of that initial process, Michael Daly, a few weeks ago. He was one of my first hires at Probar. But it while there, I just became responsible for a number of different areas and functions as we were all learning what we were doing. And over time, eventually, headed up the marketing and go to market and the kind of narrative side of the house. And funnily enough, that's kind of been the side of the house where I've stayed for the last several years. And now one of the things, in addition to my consulting side, I work with Keenan Vision, which is an analyst group out of San Francisco that is focused on, kind of the Salesforce DevOps and AI space. We work closely with Salesforce Ventures. We get to announce a lot of the stuff that Salesforce releases. We get kind of inside access, which is awesome. But I wouldn't have gotten there without a lot of the learnings along the way.
Yeah. And speaking of learning along the way, what is the most important lesson you've learned over the years growing up from role to role?
No two roles are the same. I don't care what's worked in the past. Very low likelihood of you landing in a situation where everything will be the same for that to be the case. One of the biggest, I think, roadblocks or headaches that I've run into with companies is this over reliance on the idea of Well, that's how we've always done it. That has killed more teams, departments, et cetera, than any other problem I've ever been a part of.
Yeah, totally understand. And how about you? What made you shift your focus from DevOps or QA to AI in general, or in Agentic QA in particular?
I think it's not so much shift away from those other things, but it's more of an overlay. Um, Overlay at the moment, I think it's becoming much more of a core technology. But I think it's just the reality is that's the world that we live in now. Um, we are very rapidly approaching a time when AI is deeply embedded in everything that we do. And it's only going to continue to grow and expand.
Let's talk about Agentic QA. How do you define Agentic QA in the first place?
I think it's anything where the QA processes are being owned and managed or delivered through agent based AI, agentic AI. Um, so whether you're using it to create test cases, whether you use it to execute test cases, whether you're using it to analyze results, do self healing, whatever you're using agentic AI for, that's really what it means. Um, yeah,
And what is the biggest misconception you've heard about it?
that it's a magic bullet. I think a lot of people. It depends on which side of the fence you fall on, right? If you're from a business standpoint, a lot of people are looking at it through the lens of, oh, I've got this agent based approach where I can now use that instead of having to have a body in the seat, right? I don't need a QA person. I now got this agentic based thing that can do that. I think that's one misconception, is that it can replace those people. But for the QA testers that are out there, there are a lot of people that think that it's a magic bullet for certain aspects. And it's good. It does a lot of things. There are some things it just can't replace yet, because in order for it to be successful, it needs a lot of context. And anybody that's been in QA knows, especially in the current state of development these days, context is the one thing that often lives in people's heads, right? There's not a lot of documentation on certain things.
Okay. Can you talk more about what those Agentic QA tools are and how they can help?
So, I mean, from a tooling standpoint, I think if you're looking at anything that's on the market these days, all of them are adding the tooling into place. Even things like Cypress, right? Like custom frameworks are adding agentic based tooling to their platforms. Um, I think the things that you can use to take advantage of is really using the capabilities for creating test cases, running test cases, reporting on test results. Um, those kinds of things are very easy for AI systems to do. Are they perfect yet? No, but they're probably 80% as good of an outcome as you could hope for. And for a lot of people, 80% is better than what they've been doing.
And can you share an example on how it was successful, like in real life on real project?
Um, I can tell you about trials that have been successful. So this is the greatest part of this, is we are in such early days that like the rollout of this has been, it's still new, right? Like this year new. Um, but I would say the ability to remove um, the time it takes to create test cases, right? So being able to take Jira, um, you got all your documentation in Jira, you got it in Confluence, you got your designs in Figma. Being able to take all of that information, plug it into your test case tool, and have it generate the test cases that you need for all of the areas you need to do, that's pretty powerful. But then to turn around then and automate them and run them automatically without anybody having to create scripts or anything else, I think is super powerful. And that's what we've started seeing in a lot of cases. These tools that are rolling out, that's exactly the use case that they're putting on the table. Is here, give us all the information about your systems, all about your development, about the project in motion, and then we'll generate the test cases and we will build and execute them. Now, again, they're not perfect. There's a reason human in the loop is still a concept that's real and important, but you're going to knock out 80% of the time spent pretty quickly. And that's not a made up number. I mean, we regularly saw that at Test Sigma.
Okay. Okay. Now that we know more about Agentic QA, let's talk about the risks and best practice for testing in the era of Agentic QA. First of all, automation engineers, they spend much of their time writing scripts to mimic specific testers' action. Can you talk about that and also tell us how this approach might become less relevant in the years to come?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing that everybody knows and recognizes, right? Is that there's a reason why the generated artifact from all of these things are automation scripts, right? They're a defined set of actions that do a specific thing. As a concept, that makes total sense to our very linear brains. But we're moving into a world where non-deterministic outcomes are a regular thing. And if you're going to test something that's non-deterministic, you can't put a linear path on it, right? You have to have a different way of doing that. And so the days of us being able to say, okay, here's an automation script, and that automation script is going to go through and do these actions, and the result of those actions are going to tell us yes or no, did it pass or fail. The definition of what that looks like moving forward is not going to be quite that cut and dry, right? Now we're going to have to say, here's the intended intent that we're trying to get to. Here's what we're trying to do as a result of this. Here's all the context necessary to deliver on that. And is the outcome of that within the guardrails of that defined intent, right? That's not going to be an automation script. That's going to be more business logic. That's going to be more supervisory guardrails, right? Where you said, okay, the agent can do this, and it can do this, and it can do this, and it can do this, but it can't do this, and it can't do this, and never ever say this. That's how we're going to interact with these things in the future. And when we're testing them, we have to take those things into account. So what it means for the guys today, is automation scripting going to go away overnight? No. But I do think we are moving towards a world where interacting with the DOM in and of itself may not be as necessary as it used to be, right? I wrote an article recently that argued this very point. The days where you write a script and that script interacts with the DOM, and in order to automate it, there's certain things that we can do behind the scenes, or shortcut we can take, or specific actions to replicate the flow that a user would go through, but not necessarily the explicit user behavior. We're moving away from that, right? A lot of these agentic-based systems, when they do the execution, they're interacting with it just like a user would. They're not interacting with the DOM at any level, right? They're interacting with it purely through the browser, to the browser interface. And that is going to fundamentally change what automation in and of itself looks like over the next several years.
Yeah, exactly. But just to follow up with this question, as a QA, we are often asked to specialize in custom frameworks
Yep.
or other platforms, right? So how
Yep.
risky is to continue follow this requirement to specialize in specific tools?
I mean, I think I wouldn't say it's a risk. I would say it's worth recognizing that the guaranteed future state of those tools is a safe future. Um, I think it's worth recognizing that the tools and the ways that we go about doing things are changing. Um, Ideally, some of these tools and custom frameworks keep pace with that. But if they don't, you need to recognize that you do need to look into what that looks like, right? What are the alternatives that are out there, and start future proofing yourself a little bit.
Okay. Many QA teams still focus on heavily on UI regression and manual exploration. Will it be enough to ensure quality in today's systems?
I mean, I think if you look at it purely through that lens, um, that becomes a difficult. Um, I don't know if you can say that necessarily, because I think there's so many other factors that are becoming important, that the way we've traditionally said, "Yep, good to go," uh, is rapidly changing, like very, very quickly. Um, and here's the real kicker to this is because I think one of the topics we're going to talk about is about junior testers and what does that look like getting into the space. One of the things that I see happening, and this isn't just my opinion, this is something I've seen at companies, is the shifting of the testing process away from QA minded people to non-technical users, people that don't have um, this pre-existing knowledge of what you need to do to say that it's good. They're going to be operating simply off of what these tools are telling us. And so really getting a core understanding of what it means to deliver a quality product and what that strategy looks like, to me, becomes one of the more important aspects of what we have to look at going forward, not just a checkbox pass or fail.
Okay. And do you have any other risks in mind related to the current way we're doing automation testing that we didn't mention here?
I think the biggest risk that I'm worried about going forward is not so much on the individual, as it is on organizations as a whole. But obviously, people can do everything they need to do in order to um, better themselves in this space. But that's around this idea that the more we shift towards these agentic based tools and systems and away from people with QA knowledge, even if you still have humans in the loop, there is going to be a little bit of a brain drain when it comes to like QA testing best practices and the things that will never ever live, no matter how much context you connect to a system from a Jira or Confluence or Figma or GitHub or any of those. There are certain things that just live in people's heads. And the biggest risk that I see is that these tools are going to replace the people from a bandwidth perspective, whether they legitimately replace them or not. They will be doing those functions, which means the people that are left need to be focusing on the actual quality aspects of that and how to ensure a good quality outcome. So there's a podcast that I did with testing peers a couple months ago where we talked about this very topic. Where what is it going to look like when AI comes in and QA has to change? What does that mean for people? I would highly recommend people going and listening to it because it's a great episode where a bunch of smart QA people are talking about what the future is going to look like when it comes to AI.
Okay, absolutely. And I've been also playing around with those tools, and there are many great features, such as self-healing. But despite the fact that sounds great, what blind spots or failure mode should we watch out for?
Self-healing is one of those terms that is so dependent on who's saying it for what they actually mean by it. One of the dangers of that is if it's true self-healing, you're not going to know whether you're covering up an actual bug in the system or you're just rewriting your test case to account for it. Right? Because that's one of the biggest challenges and things that I've seen people struggle with is when a test fails, you run an automated test and that test fails, right? There's two possible reasons for that failure. One is that the test was wrong and you needed to fix the test so that it would pass successfully, right? And the other reason it would fail is it's supposed to, right? The reason why it passed the first time and not the second time is because something changed and it caught that. Understanding the self-healing, being able to understand the difference between those two things is super important. If it's doing it in an unassisted way and just saying, oh, hey, we fixed it, we made the test, go ahead and run, that's not always what you want to have happen, right? Because you actually do need to know that, oh, hey, we found a place here where it didn't work. And so as a result, here's where it failed. Here are some suggestions for what you should do. How do you want us to handle this one? That, to me, is a useful system. Tools like Context QA have this baked in and they do it really, really well, which is, hey, this isn't working. We found this solution. Should we make this adjustment? Because you may not want to make that adjustment. Maybe the reason it's failing is because it's like actually broken. There's a reason why it should be failing. And so, no, I want you to leave it exactly how it is because they need to fix it on the development side and then we rerun it. That to me is a huge blind spot. Anybody that says self-healing never really takes that conversation into account.
And another concern with Agentic QA, if the test agents can reason, quote unquote, what kind of proof or evidence will teams need to trust their past or failed decision, especially in sensitive industries such as healthcare, banking, where you cannot afford to make mistakes?
So I think those industries are going to be the last ones to get on the agentic train for exactly the reasons you just described. I think one of the evidentiary points, if you will, is going to be less about the proof after you've done the test. But, and this is where I think the mindset of QA people are going to have to shift. It's going to need to shift to the beginning of the process around all the context that it's given and making sure that the guardrails and expectations are appropriately set and that they're not too vague and not too open-ended. And so your evidence or your proof points are not so much at the end of the process, they're more at the beginning, right? Making sure you've appropriately set that context and defined the appropriate intent for these systems to work correctly.
Okay. And do you think it's possible to build a single source of truth for those decisions?
Yeah, I mean, I think people want to. I think that's the the whole general idea, right? That's what every company promises is like, you bring all of your stuff into here and we'll give you a single source of truth. I don't know that the tools and the platforms today are mature enough in such a way that that's really feasible or possible, especially when you consider all of them do each part of that conversation better or less good than the other people in the space. And so there's no one true, this one place is really good at all of the aspects of pulling that information together, right? Whether it's creating the test cases, whether it's managing them, reporting on them, leadership dashboards, you know, connecting to Jira, test case man, whatever the case may be, right? There's no one company that's like got that. So there's all of these best of breed tools that, we're using test rail for this, or we're using trying to think of another one that would be relevant. We're using Provar for Salesforce automation and Capado for CI/CD, and we're using ExcelQ for general automation. Right? They're using different tools for every aspect of that conversation. And so having a single source of truth is really hard in that scenario, right? Because then you have to introduce another system that is going to aggregate all of that information and give you that federated view. Like that in today's ecosystem, I don't know if it's possible right now. At least not in the way that we currently see it. I do think it's possible as we move more towards this agentic model, and we start shifting from these overlay models where everybody's hooking up to individual systems to a more of an embedded system, where the AI and everything is part of a singular platform, and it's going out and getting the information and bringing it back. In that scenario, I do think that's much more realistic. But man, that's 3 to 5 years away at least.
Okay. Another question, with your experience, what measures do you recommend to put in place to ensure proper governance, transparency, security?
I don't know that there is a singular measure. I think there's a lot of potential options in this space. I think there's also going to potentially be new tools entirely around this idea of quality governance, quality management. And there's a tool called Wayfound that they have what they call supervisor agents that are responsible for making sure that the agents you have are doing what they're supposed to do. But not necessarily from a technical standpoint, but from a business standpoint, right? We've set this business logic in place to ensure that these agents are following that within those constraints. I think those kinds of tools where there's, hey, the agent went off the rails here. This is what should have happened. This is what did happen. Here's our recommendations for how you tweak the agent instructions to ensure that in the future that doesn't happen. Those kinds of things I think are going to be far more important than any measure or number, if you will.
Got it. Now that we identified some risks, let's discuss how we can adapt in this new era. My first question in this topic will be: I saw you wrote a Salesforce state automation landscape report, and what did you find out?
The world is moving very, very fast towards agentic-based testing.
Yeah.
Pretty much every tool vendor I talked to, that was part of the conversation, either as a core aspect to it or as a complementary aspect to their main traditional parts of their business. Either way, every single vendor that I talked to, that was a major part of the discussion. So the
And what?
big takeaway was the world's changing.
Yeah, exactly. And then as an individual QA, can you share some tips on how we can start using agents in the smarter way?
I think the biggest one is, during the days of Agile, right? We got into this mode where less documentation was preferred, right? We didn't need to document everything. We made adjustments on the fly, et cetera. I think the biggest thing that we're going to have to figure out going forward is getting back to a place where we're doing more documentation and more precise and accurate and thorough documentation on things, because all of that information are the things that are going to be used to power these agents moving forward.
Okay. And if metrics like test run or pass rate don't tell the full story in an agentic world, what KPI
Mhm.
do you recommend to use to measure instead?
I still think a pass fail model is still going to be important. I don't know that necessarily making your decisions based on a metric. I've never liked that idea anyway, because to me, metrics can always be gamed.
Yeah.
I think there should be a definition of what quality looks like for your organization, and then you build the relevant dashboard or metrics slash um, go no go pass fail, whatever definition you want to use. You build a dashboard that meets what your definition of success is at your company, rather than trying to just use a number or a set of numbers. um, Sometimes there's no number involved. It's a yes or no.
Hmm. Okay, got it. And I've also seen you've described shift up as the next evolution. How does this address those future challenges better than shift left?
So I think in a lot of ways, it's still very similar to shift left. One of I've long had an issue with shift left as a concept, or as a term rather than a concept, because uh, a lot of people that use that term really just use it to mean let's test sooner in the process so that we don't have to worry about it later, right? Um, and I know not everybody does that. I'm before all of the people come out of the comment woodwork. I understand that that's not always the case. It is a lot of the time. Like I've been in this game long enough to know, and have talked with enough companies to know, yes, there are some people that absolutely get and understand what shift left is supposed to be for and what its intent is. But a lot of people take it to mean, oh, instead of testing at the end, let's test sooner in the process. And so we can be done sooner, right? When the development's done, then we're done and we can ship it. Yeah, but that whole concept doesn't take into account, you still have to do testing across the whole span of it. You also have to take into account, as we've been mentioning, like, where is my data in a good spot? Is all of the context that I'm feeding into my systems for this testing purpose in a good place, right? The idea is, instead of it being a linear thing where you're shifting left or right, right? The idea is, instead of going left and just starting sooner and following it along the way, the idea is, if you go higher, you're now seeing and involving more of the process, right? You're looking at it through a more strategic lens, and you're understanding, okay, this thing over here needs to be taken care of so that it doesn't impact this thing over here. And these things downstream over here really need to be addressed way up here at the beginning. It's really the idea of this shifting your mindset a little bit higher in the conversation, rather than just let's start sooner. That hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, happy to discuss that in more detail with anybody that wants to.
Given this context, what basic skills should tester learn now instead of scripting, for example?
I think that for me, the big thing is start to think of things through a more strategic lens, rather than just a see this thing, do this thing, check that box, done. Right? It's more of a, okay, if I do this here, then these things over here also need to be accounted for. And in order for me to do that successfully, this is the information that I need to do that successfully. Um, it's starting to look at things in a little bit more strategic fashion, recognizing that, whereas data used to be, we say data driven testing, and that used to be like inputs to make it more real world, more realistic. Data is also part of like how we define what gets tested and how it gets tested, and doing data quality and data analysis on that information to make sure it's in a good enough spot is going to be super, super important, to almost as important, if not more so, than any of the other aspects of testing.
Okay, so as a follow-up question, what roles can QA grow into to become more competitive in the near future?
I think it's really funny because we've had this term QA analyst for a long time, right? That's what a lot of junior roles are QA analysts. I actually think the analyst part of that we're going to see become a real thing. Um, and this idea that you're more than just a tester, right? A lot of people see QA and testing, and they kind of um, blend those two terms, or treat them as meaning the same thing. And then they're not, right? Testing is a part of the QA process, but the QA process encompasses so much more. Being able to look at that bigger picture and the things that need to go into that, I think are going to become more important than the testing process itself. Because if you think about it, the tools that are coming into play, they're going to be really good at the testing part, right? Writing the test cases, running the tests, and reporting on the tests. It's everything on the outside of those that's going to become important now, right? Won't be tomorrow, but it will be soon.
Yeah, totally got it. So, so you would think like something that would be on demand would be like QA architect, for example?
I think so. I think QA architects, I'm sure that role's title has been used in the past, but one of my previous titles was automation architect. And what I see is this being something where the QA side of it is going to need somebody in that type of role, right? QA architects, quality architects, something along those lines, where it's the person kind of defining how you're going to do the testing and what that testing is going to look like. Um, I think that's going to become important.
Okay. And how can we better communicate our value to the team we're working with?
This is the age-old question. I would say the biggest thing is learn to use your voice. Um, don't don't be loud and combative for the sake of being loud and combative, but make sure you understand your position on certain things, whether this is good enough, whether this should go live or not, whether this is a recurring thing and it really needs to be addressed. Learn to speak up early about those things. And you know you don't necessarily want to be like a dog with a bone, right? And just won't let it go, but you know have some persistence in it. Like, make sure that the right people are aware of your place in the conversation. I've seen way too many QA people, even automation people, that are just too quiet. They would rather be in the background, and I don't know how viable that's going to be as we move forward, right? Because the human aspect is the thing that we still need in the QA space.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, the human aspect is needed more than ever with
100%.
yeah. So now we entering the last part of the interview when I ask you about some tips to get started on learning resources. First, what advice would you give to someone entering QA today?
Oh, I would say look at it through the lens of knowing what the expectations are. Um, One of the things that I think is going to be a real thing is how many people are going to be entering QA from an intentional standpoint, right? What I see happening is people in non QA, non technical roles being pulled into it without forewarning, right? They're going to be one day your team has a QA team that's responsible for that, and tomorrow they're gone and you're responsible for it. I think the for me the biggest thing is understanding just what should be tested, when should it be tested, how often should it be tested, the basics of just quality management, right? What are the questions that need to be asked? Those kind of questions are important. But more so than that, understand the things that AI does really well and don't focus on those. Because if AI is able to do them well today, they're going to be great at them tomorrow. And there's no reason a human's going to do them. Like that's just reality. So don't spend time on the things that AI is good at.
And for example, when should they invest their first 6 months?
I would make sure that I understand what QA and testing is at their core. Like if you're gonna make a career of this, right? Make sure you understand testing and quality assurance and understanding at a deep level, not just a very surface level understanding, but like real world use cases and talking to people in forums and groups and understanding how you would go about doing this. Do thought exercises where you're going and like Amazon.com, right? Go to the homepage and say, how would I test this page? Right? What all needs to go into this? And if you take away and strip away all of the hands-on testing aspects, like, okay, what are the things they need to know about this page? What are the expectations of people on this page? What types of people come to this page? Being able to understand those things, again, not so much the testing pieces, the things that AI is going to be good at, but what are the things that AI is going to need to know in order to be successful? Learn how to do those things. That's where I would spend my time.
Okay. And do you recommend any formal tutorial, books, certifications for learning?
I would say I don't think there's any one great one. I think Joe does a good job, Joe Colantonio over at Test Guild, with a lot of the stuff that he does. Um, Ministry of Testing has some good content. There's certifications like ITQS. I can't even remember the name, but ITQSB, I think, is the um, thing. ASQ, Association for Software Quality. Um, I think there's a lot of okay stuff that's out there. The problem is there's no standards, and so the important thing is that you find things that are relevant to the situation that you're in and are going to help you in your situation, not in somebody else's.
Okay, thank you. So last question for today. Do you have any thought or something you want to share we didn't mention in this interview?
I don't think so. I think for me the big thing is really this whole idea of AI is coming for our jobs. I wouldn't look at it through that lens. I think it's AI is just another tool that we're going to have at our disposal. It's going to make certain job functions less important and other job functions more important. and being able to recognize that distinction, I think is going to be really important.
Okay. So yeah, thank you very much. So this was my last question. John, thank you very much for your time. It's been a valuable conversation. I personally learned a lot. So thank you for sharing your insights.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. For anyone curious who wants to know more about it, I will share the links with your LinkedIn profile. I know you're very active with some articles you've wrote before. And
Yep. I've got lots of information out there. And even the podcast that I mentioned, you can find it on my LinkedIn profile.
okay, I'll add everything in the show notes. So thank you. So this concludes today's episode of How to Test This. I hope you guys find this episode valuable. If you did, please share it with your colleagues and stay tuned for upcoming episodes. We will continue to learn from experts about their favorite testing tools and tips to become better software testers. So I'm Mamadou. This was How to Test This, and see you next time.